Hey everybody, no reason for us to do an intro a second time around. So sorry, we're not sure what happened. We were sitting here chatting and the stream just ended, and I'm gonna blame it on StreamYard. So that way, yeah. My
Seems reasonable.
apologies. Yeah. I hope it seems reasonable. It seems reasonable to me. So we were just talking about our Azure OpenAI model. Thank you first off to everybody who's already found us. We put this out on LinkedIn, we put it out on Twitter, but also part of the reason that we are recording this is to make sure that people can access this. So thank you once again for joining in with us. So I was just starting to talk about, and I want to make sure that that I go back and I get this. I'm over here in the Azure portal, and what I wanted to talk about was how to provision an Azure OpenAI model so we can interact with it within our notebook that we have within Microsoft Fabric. So I'm going to start out in the Azure portal, and I can see that I've got Azure services right here. I can go in the search bar, and I can see recent services. I can also just type Azure OpenAI, and it will pop up right here underneath services, and it will take me directly to the services. Now, the thing that I was trying to make sure that everybody understood probably around the time that we dropped was if this is your first time making it over to the Azure OpenAI section in Azure, you're going to have to fill out a form. The form takes a day to 2 or 3 days to be able to get processed and get approval so you can access the models. So just keep that in mind. You've got some lead up time here, but basically you put in your information, you put in your subscription, you're sending it to a product group. Part of this reason is because CPU, GPU it's very, OpenAI processes are very CPU and GPU intent. We want to make sure that we don't, that we keep the process going. And so, sorry about that. I've got some stuff popping up in another window that made my taskbar show up again. So once you process that form, this is what it's going to look like. You're going to come in here and you're going to be able to say create. I'm going to go in, I'm going to create a new workspace for us. I'm going to say Vival October Soft Fabric. So that way I've got that resource group. And let's do the same thing. Vival October MS Fabric. And the pricing tier is only, we've only got one option. I'm going to, for the network right now, I'm going to leave this in place. But it's important to understand that you could configure this to work with specific networks if you have private endpoints in place. So that way you've got that secure architecture as you're passing data back and forth to these models. Next, for tags, I'm just going to put owner, and I'm going to put Bradley Ball. You'll probably have some tags that you have to put in there based off your organization. And then I'm going to click review and submit, and it's going to create this model. Now, I already have a model that is created that I'm going to use, but I'm going to push this through because there's a couple things I'd like us to be able to see. So first off, when this deploys, what we're going to do is we're going to open the Azure OpenAI, the Azure ML OpenAI playground. There's a lot of samples. There's a lot of demos that we will have access to. But one of the key things to keep in mind is that when we look at this, specifically, there's some information that we're going to need so that way we can access this within our notebooks. So hold on real quick. I need people to stop IMing me. I'm just going to close Teams at this point. There we go. Now I can share my desktop again.
Too popular, Brad. Too popular.
I know. Just a lot of stuff coming through, right? So once I'm in here in my OpenAI model, I'm going to go to Develop, and you can see here's the Azure OpenAI Studio. Now, once I go into the Azure OpenAI Studio, that's going to take a moment to load. This is where we're going to see that we've got a whole bunch of different fun things that we can play around with. There's different tutorials to be able to walk you through DALL-E, process creation, things of that nature. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over to models, and I'm going to focus on some models real quick. These are the different models that we have access to. Now, I do not have access to the GPT-4 models, which is probably wise on Microsoft's part because I would use them a lot. So what we've got here is we've got a couple different models. Now, when I have used this, initially, specifically with Marco, we had one of our fast track engineers on, and we initially did something with the DaVinci text embedding. Then what I did was I started using the ChatGPT 3.5 Turbo. And I've also, in another demo we're going to do, I've got the GPT 3.5 16K demo. So in all, these are going to be the two models that we're using today. And it's important to understand these are the different models you have to choose from. Now, when we come to deployments, we create a new model deployment. We select a model. In this case, I'm going to say a 16K, and then we make it a name. Wednesday demo. Or today is Tuesday. I'm off on my days of the week. Sorry about that. Now, once we create this model is right here. There's a couple things that we're going to need to be able to access this model if we want to be able to work with it. So one of the things we'll need to do is we'll need to head back over to the Azure portal, and we're going to go to keys and endpoints. When I click on keys and endpoints, I'm going to have my keys right here, and I've got my endpoint specifically. So here's what I'm going to need to copy. Now, why do I have this blurred out? Well, I've got an add-in, AZ mask, to be able to blur this out for me. And part of the reason is you don't want to give people your key or your endpoint unless you specifically want them to use your model. Because what we're going to do is we're going to invoke that model using the key and the endpoint. One of the questions that I've received about this specifically is my data secure? And what I'd love to tell you is, yes, absolutely, it is secure. As a matter of fact, we have documentation, and I will I passed that along to someone just recently. I will find that and I will put that in the description of this video as well. But one of the things that we do is we specifically state that what we're not using your data for. We're not accessing it at all. We're not training models with it. We aren't storing your data. We aren't utilizing your data. There is an abuse service that will monitor the hash of the data as it flows through to make sure that, ethical things are being ethical things are being done. Mr. Alex Paller's right over there. I also wish it was Wednesday. Pro wrestling and pizza night. Pro wrestling and pizza night, Brad. That needs to be a thing.
I mean, to be fair, every night is pizza night. So
every night is pizza night. I was going to say it's Halloween today, so it's definitely pizza night. I'm going to sit out front and give adult trick-or-treats to the adults as they pass by, and then full-size candy bars to the kids. And we are decked out and ready to go. But
our neighborhood last year sent out a map of where all of the adult trick-or-treat locations were throughout the neighborhood. So
that's fantastic. Yeah, I was going to say that's incredibly important. But we keep we keep the data very, very private. And we make sure that we're not using it for anything. It is your data. We want it to maintain being your data, and we don't want you to feel at risk. Now, the way that data is communicated to the model, part of that is going to depend on if we're over the network or if we're using those private networks. So when we're talking like if you were a medical company or if you had sensitive information, if you were a financial services company, creating something based off of loan information or things of that nature, I would say we would need to make sure that this is secured over a private endpoint and over a specific network where we're not communicating this out over the internet. Now, everything I'm doing, of course, because I'm using Microsoft Fabric, is using the Azure backplane. So it is incredibly secure and it is not leaving our data center or our backplane. But if you were communicating with these models outside of Microsoft Fabric, there's some securing that we may want to do. So now that I've got my model information, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take us back over to Microsoft Fabric. And I'm going to run through a couple of these cells because this is a demo that I've done before. Now we're going to talk about how to invoke it, but we're also going to talk about how we troubleshoot Python, because specifically what I'm doing, I'm using Beautiful Soup to be able to go out. And I needed to do this cell first. And then once I've got that, now I can go ahead and I can scrape data. And what I'm doing is I'm going out and I'm getting a whole bunch of different movie data. When this completes, I'm going to do a quick print of that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to do some conversions. I'm not going to step through the whole exercise that I did in our video, because I want to make sure that we get to where we're troubleshooting this. And this is specifically for LangChain. Brad, are you familiar with LangChain?
Absolutely not.
Wonderful.
Thank you for asking.
No problem. So LangChain is a Python module. You can use it in Python. You can also use it in Node.js. And one of the things that you can do with LangChain is you can create an agent-like process, and you can send data, and you can also send questions through specifically about your data for the model to be able to evaluate your process. Now, I'm going to do some evaluation utilizing the model specifically with the Semantic kernel. But one of the things that we're going to do here is I'm going to show you how to troubleshoot a module. So I did this specifically to get movie data, because when I did this video, I was looking at taking Sue to the movies for her birthday, and I wanted a good recommendation for this. Of course, I passed it by her, but it actually came out with a really great recommendation for us. We ended up doing an at-home movie night, and she absolutely loved the video. Now, there's a whole bunch of different things that we can do right here. I'm going to real quick comment this out, because one of the things we can do is we can pip to install our LangChain module. But I've already got my fix in place. And what I want to do is I want it to show you this in its current non-fixed format. So this is going to run, let's see, maybe it didn't like this. So let me take that out real quick, and then I can fix it later. This is going to pip, and this is going to install our LangChain OpenAI. Now, this is going to run for a little while. And part of the reason I'm showing you this is specifically this should run for about 40 to 50 seconds. And what I noticed that was very different than when I did this initially was when I went down to this value right here, attempting to uninstall type extensions. So there's also some additional packages that we're installing. And I always love the name of these open source packages, right? Marshmallow, JSON pointer, and noted types, type inspection, Pydamic core, JSON patch, Pydamic, OpenAI, and then data class JSON, LangSmith, and LangChain. But specifically, when we noticed that the type extensions was being uninstalled and reinstalled with a new version, that was when I noticed that some things were going on. And as you can see, this is running in, before this would typically run in about 10 to 12 seconds. We're at over a minute, and it's still continuing to run. This will run successfully. However, when it finishes, what I'm going to find is when I go to actually run my code and invoke my model, that's where I'm going to have some issues. Yeah, I can see. I wish notebook logs were more verbose. I'm with you. Hey, it's our good friend Brent 3 here. This is a Microsoft's version of Python, right? If so, are only some pip packages supported? That's a great question. So this is a Conda version, specifically, and I'm going to get to that in a second. That's a great question, M&H Work Dev. And then also, Excel supports a limited version of Python using Python function. Yes, it does. This supports a very, very broad use. As a matter of fact, up at the top, you saw that I used Beautiful Soup. And real quick, you can see here, this took a minute 21. We've also used PyODBC in previous demos. This is an incredibly powerful version of Python. And I'm going to show you the version that we're running in just a second. Now, I have hidden my input, but remember when we created our OpenAI model, I needed the base API version, I needed the key, and then I needed the endpoint. And when I put those in place, I'm able to execute this. And again, here's our movie data that we pulled out. And now I'm going to come in here. I'm going to invoke the large language models, open verbose. And I wish this would work, but it's going to fail. Now, the funny thing would be if this actually worked, then half my demo's gone, right? So this is the one time that not working.
The one time a demo works live is when you don't want it to work live.
Exactly. And you can see I cannot import name type extensions from typing extensions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here And let me clear these outputs real quick. So first off, I want to make sure that I print out what version that we are using. And again, keep in mind, as we talked about at the top, the Copilot is anything that invokes a large language model. So that's why I've got that comment up at the top. And what I can see, a nice tiny print right here, this is Python 3.10.10 by Conda Forge. We can see the last time that it was fully updated. So I have gone through this exercise. I'm not going to make you sit through the minute and a half of me doing 2.67. Real quick, the LangChain is incremented by 0.001, and it's typically incremented daily. So right now, we're actually at a pretty high and advanced version of LangChain. Now, when this runs, this should run a lot more quickly. And one of the things you'll notice, I didn't need to uninstall and install type extensions. And if I run this exact same frame after invoking my model, this is just going to complete successfully for me. So what I can do to be able to fix this is I come in here and I specifically, when I do my install, I pip and I do this version 2.66. If you're going to use this in Microsoft Fabric, this is the version of LangChain that we need to utilize. So I'm going to come through here. I'm going to reinstall this. This is going to take about 12 seconds this time. My data is still sitting there in my Spark frame. I'm going to come down here, invoke my model, rerun this just to show you that my data is sitting there in memory. And then when I come down and I run this, now I've got a different error. Well, this is the demo guys definitely biting me. There's the live demo. Okay. Well, now I have an issue where I don't have Pandemic V1 as a module. So you know what I'm going to do? Part 2 of a video where I show you how to be able to fix this using Pandemic, which is probably why I'm using the Semantic kernel in my next demo, because I found the Semantic kernel to be much more stable. Yeah, Josh Ludeman, you got it right. There we go. Nothing like a live demo first thing in the morning that worked last night before you went to bed. Good stuff. All right.
At least you practice your demos to make sure that they worked at some point.
I did practice my demos. So I had to close Teams because I kept getting pinged on Teams. So I have closed the agenda that we have. Niraj, can you tell me what we have next on the agenda? I can't remember if this is a Bradley Chat demo or if this is a Bradley Baldwin.
So Query Insights is where we're going to go next.
Oh, okay.
Query Insight by Brad Chat.
There we go.
That's this guy. This one. All right. So now a demo that actually works. We'll take a look at that. Hopefully. Now watch, everything's going to fail miserably. So something that we just released, the documentation for this page, I probably should have this pulled up, but the documentation for this literally just went live yesterday. And I'll show you here real quick. So if you go out and do a search for Fabric Query Insights, you'll get this page here. It tells you all kinds of stuff about Query Insights. Good news is it's actually enabled by default on every single workspace. So there's nothing you need to do to get access to Query Insights. It's just there, which is awesome. Now, what is Query Insights and why do we need it? Let's kind of start there. Query Insights gives you the ability to look back historically at what has been running on your SQL endpoint. So right now, if I were to go run something, let's assume Query Insights didn't exist. I were to go run something on my data warehouse, and it takes 5 minutes to run. While that query is running, I can go look at sys.dm exec requests, and I can see the operation. However, as soon as that query finishes running, I lose all insight into what actually happened. So we don't have a history like we did on the Synapse data warehouse, where we keep the last X number of thousand, anywhere between 4 and 10,000 records, depending on what the DMV was. And we don't have the exec request history built in like we had on the serverless side. So what we've done with Query Insights is we said, hey, we're going to take all of the queries that you run, we're going to put them into a history table, which you can see here is in just a moment is the exec request history. And we are also going to give you some additional information or additional insights into what's going on your SQL endpoint over time. So there's actually, today anyway, there's 3 different views that we can look at. In the future, we're going to look at extending these and possibly adding some more. But let's talk about what's available today. So why do we need Query Insights? Historical performance of queries and historical retention of the queries that were being used are probably 2 of the most important reasons why we might need this. The other thing which you're going to see tie into some stuff we talked about in last month's update is actually a little bit for billing purposes and how we can track down what a query costs or what query costs us a bunch of money. And we'll look at both of those pieces here in just a minute. So I'll share this notebook out later as well if folks want to look through this, but some of the stuff is in the documentation pages as well. So to get started, let's just look at our exec request history. If we just do the top 10 on here, you'll notice that I'm actually qualifying this with the warehouse or lakehouse SQL endpoint that I want to pull the data from. So the query insights schema and views actually exist in every single SQL endpoint. And if I were to come over here and drill into one of my databases, I could look at my views and see I've got these 3 query insights views here inside the query insights schema. So you're going to see these inside of every one of your SQL endpoints. Now, whenever I run this, you'll see the distributed statement ID. This is going to be one of the most important things that you will encounter inside of the Fabric SQL world. Because if you want to know how much did this query cost, if I want to look at when the query ran, if I need to contact support because something goes wrong, they're going to ask you, and you're going to need that distributed statement ID. It's going to pop up everywhere. Okay, so that's the unique identifier for this query that was run. At this particular query, it started and finished at a specific time, and it gives you the number of seconds or milliseconds that elapsed, who actually ran it. So if I want to be able to see who ran queries, when they ran them, and what they actually what query they ran, I can go out here and do some analysis based on that. We're also going to tell you whether it was succeeded, canceled, or failed. The SQL session ID. So if you select the SPID, that's what this is going to give you. You can get the connection information as well as where they actually ran the query from. And then some other information that we've got all the way down to the actual command that the user ran. So this is incredibly useful information to be able to go out and look at what has been run on my SQL endpoint. Okay. And so again, that statement ID, that distributed statement ID, every single time you run a query, if you go over to the messages tab of your output, you're going to see a statement ID. And that statement ID is going to line up with some distributed statement ID inside my query insight store later on. Again, we'll come back to that in just a little bit. Okay. If we want to, again, we can look for specific queries in here as well. So I happen to know that the other night I did a bunch of data loading operations. And to do that inside the data warehouse, I ran a copy into. Well, I can do a like. So I say, I want to go look at the SQL command that was run and show me every single SQL command that started with copy into DBO dot something. Okay. And you can see here that I loaded a bunch of tables. So this is actually the TPCH data set. And you can see the 8 different tables that I had to load. And I can now take a look at each one of those. So I can see that the line item table, for instance, is a fairly large table inside that data set. And if I come over here and I can look at that, you'll see that that lines up with being one of the longest running queries inside of there. You've got these other ones here that only load a couple of rows and they take very little time. But we can do this to be able to look at what's going on with our queries. Okay. If we come down a little bit more, you can see, well, what about my longest running queries or my most frequently run queries here? We've got views that will give you this type of information as well. I'm not going to belabor these because I want to get to something else to how we tie this into the capacity metrics here while we still have some time. But just know that we do have some other insights that you can gain from these other different views that are inside of here. And a question that comes up frequently is how are these queries grouped? What happens if I have the same basic query, but I run it with a different where clause every single time? Well, from a frequently run queries perspective, we're going to group those queries together irrespective of the where clause. That means that if I'm looking at my sales by day and I look at January versus February, we're going to say that those are both essentially from a tracking perspective right here that they were the same query even though they had separate where clauses on the end of those. Okay? So just be aware of that whenever you're looking at the data here. You don't have to go and search for the exact where clause that was added. You just need to know the basics of the query. Okay. This query here, this frequently run, is actually a really interesting one because it gives you a lot of really cool metrics. So how many times was it run? What was the minimum, maximum, and average runtime of that? How many were successful? How many failed? All kinds of really useful stuff here, all the way down to what, again, the actual command was. So
That's
how does this?
fantastic.
Yeah, as you,
I'm loving this. Brad, you're talking to my DBA heart here. This is the monitoring stuff that we've been waiting for to be able to come in, and this is so fantastic.
it really is. And this last piece here is the thing that I got the most excited about was because when I was doing some of this testing originally a couple months ago, I went to one of the feature PMs and I was like, hey, this is a kind of a little bit of a pain for me to go figure out how much this query actually costs me, because I get customers ask me all the time, how much is this going to cost? Well, we run a sample, a representative workload. We go look at the capacity metrics, and boom, you got your cost. You extrapolate that out. Well, it's hard because I couldn't ever figure out, like, unless I captured somehow the queries and the output of everything that was running, I couldn't go back and get them later. And so Maria was like, hey, we've got this query insights thing coming. Why don't you take a look at this? Well, lo and behold, if I want to know how much one of these queries costs, all I have to do, going back to my load queries here, come over here, let's find my line item. So the fourth record down. I'm going to grab that distributed query ID. I'm going to say copy. And then I'm actually going to hop over here to my capacity metrics app. So if you
Oh,
remember, we looked at this one last month in
yeah.
our update. But let me see when this actually ran. On the 30th at about 6:20 p.m. So if I come over here someplace on the 30th after 6:20 p.m., again, select your appropriate capacity. I happen to run this particular one on a trial. And now these background operations, this is what we talked about last time. If we come over here and we filter our background operations, once this loads, it's a very large list. So we're just going to take that query ID that we had, we're going to paste it into here. And assuming everything goes well with the demos here, there we go. My query ID shows up. It's going to filter this background operations section down to just that one query. And now we can go over here, we see that operation ID. I can tell you with very high confidence, absolute certainty, that the total number of capacity units that it took me to load the line item table for the TPCH 1 terabyte data set on whatever SKU I happen to be running, in this case, the Fabric Trial 1 SKU, it cost me a grand total of 80,595 capacity unit seconds. Okay. So we
Yeah.
can get all the way down to an individual query inside of here. And then we can go the other way too. We're not going to belabor this too much here, but if we were to come over and take one of these from my data warehouse over here, I could take this exact same thing. I could say copy this value. I don't know if this actually goes with this warehouse or not, but we'll give it a try here. It might be from a different one. And okay, so it was. So we can see once I took that distributed statement ID from my capacity metrics app, I plug it into that same exec request history, and I can see the command here was copy into my orders table. I can see how long it ran and everything. And now I can say, hey, whoever ran this, in this case, this Brad guy, um, I can now go to him and say, hey, look, you cost me. You were the fourth highest cost of queries running on this particular capacity. This is a dev capacity. Why are you using so much of my capacity here? And go yell at whoever it was that ran that particular query. So a
Well,
lot of things that you're able to really tie together and go from your warehouse into your metrics or backwards from the metrics.
and maybe you don't want to yell at Brad. Maybe this is part of the process
I
that
don't
needs
think
to be
you
run.
never want to yell at Brad.
Well, you never want to, right? But that doesn't mean people don't. But when
Sure.
we look at how we plan out an environment, one of the things that customers always want to know is, if I'm going to have something, how do I estimate an increase, a decrease? How do I
Mhm.
look at what we're doing? This is that granular level of per query detail of what the cost is that helps you to be able to estimate, based off our processing. Because as we look at data, data volumes often increase. One of the things
Yep.
companies don't like to do is get rid of their data. They want to be able to have longer data so that we can look at data sets and data patterns. I mean, it makes sense. I'm the same way. But at the same time, these things also really make it to where it's very important for us to understand how we find these details, but then how we also estimate what we're going to be doing. Great stuff. I love it. We've got a question. MHF Dev, I am more of a data analyst than a data engineer, so I may ask a silly question. No silly questions here, buddy. You're safe. Are there any plans or current functionality to monitor Python performance as this runs in the cloud? Also, what capacity or average Azure service would this fall under? Was wondering if there's an implicit cost of low performing Python. Um, I don't know. Brad, this may be a question where we need to get back to folks.
Yeah, I don't know that we have
Or do
anything
you
right
know
now.
if this has a granular level of use in Python?
So I'd have to go ask
And
one of the
Brad, I
guys on
think your
the.
headset stopped working because you're not on mute, but I can't hear you.
Can Niraj hear me? Can you hear me
Oh,
now?
we've got an audio issue with Brad. I tell you what, I'm going to pop this question down. Brad, whenever we get your audio fixed,
I
just
can hear
come
Brad.
online over this.
Everybody else can hear me.
And
You're the problem, Brad.
Brad,
I'll go ahead and I'll take the next demo. Bradley Schatt is a capacity metrics expert. Absolutely. Oh, you can hear Brad. It's me.
Everybody else can hear me.
Okay. Well, never mind. Then, Brad, I'm going to let you go answer away and I'm going to figure out what's going on with my headset.
It's Brad. It's not Brad. So I guess the answer that I would say there is I don't know of anything specifically that we have around performance, like the performance degradation or performance monitoring on the Spark side specifically. I'm happy to go ask one of my teammates that specializes in that area, and we can certainly get you a response and post something in the chat there later on. But what we're looking at here in the context of these pieces today, from this side, what I've got on the screen right now in the capacity metrics, this portion of it won't have anything necessarily performance related. We do have some stuff on the very front page here around the performance delta on things, but it doesn't really give you. It's not built to give you insights into why something happened. More just to call it out and say, hey, there was a change here, and now go someplace else and figure it out. Which in this case would be over to the data engineering workload to try to figure that out. So I'll do some more digging on that and would be happy to drop a note in the chat afterward. So while we wait for Brad to get back in, I'll go ahead and show you guys one other thing on the data warehouse side of things, because we landed a new piece of functionality called DML publishing. So today, or like 2 days ago rather, if you were to create a table inside of your data warehouse, we would publish the Delta logs that go along with that into OneLake. That way, you can go out and you can consume that data with your Spark cluster, or with Kusto or wherever. You can go consume it with those other engines. Well, the challenge and the issue that you would run into is that we only publish the insert operations. We didn't publish any of the update or the delete vectors. So you never got your update or your delete operations that were reflected. So if I come out here, just to show you what this looks like, if I come out, I create a table, and I'm going to insert a record into this table. If I go over to my OneLake File Explorer, and if you haven't seen this, there's a video out on the Tales from the Field YouTube channel on this, I believe. But OneLake File Explorer will allow you to browse everything in OneLake directly from File Explorer on your desktop. So I don't have to go out and fire up Python or anything to be able to search for all this. So if I look inside of my my tables here, maybe let's try this again, and we'll run another insert statement there. What will happen in just a moment? Hop back over here. Let me refresh this again. Query log. and we'll sync that. Okay, well, what normally happens, now my demos are all going crazy. There's actually a latency of up to a minute or two on the DML getting pushed to OneLake. But what will happen here in just a moment is that you will see the um, the DML publish um, the DML publish directory get added into this particular directory. And then what will happen after a moment, if I come out here and I make some updates, you'll then see those updates are also reflected out here in OneLake. So basically, the net of this is we're delivering on the promise to say we're going to have one copy of the data that you can use with any of the engines. So a week ago, if I were to do this, I would only get the insert operations that were reflected when I tried to consume the data over on the Spark side of things. If I were to come out here, do some updates on the data, delete some data out of my table, I now get the full copy, the full current DML version of the table available to you over inside the Spark engine as well. So again, kind of just delivering on that promise of one copy of data, no matter which engine you want to use. And that also means that for Power BI, when we go into direct lake mode for the data warehouse, that means I don't just get my insert operations that are reflected in my direct lake mode. I'm now also going to have any records that get updated or deleted. Those will be reflected inside of my data as well, which if I'm building a report, having a current view of all of the data inserted, updated, and deleted is rather important to me getting accurate insights for my business. So, Brad, are you back?
I am back, and I can hear your beautiful dulcet tones again. Thank you so
Lovely.
much for covering. Sorry about that. So I was supposed to do this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hop back over to our notebooks because we talked about invoking our OpenAI model. But what I really want to do is I want to show folks how we do this via the semantic kernel. Hopefully I don't get an error this time in the demo. So the one thing I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to do a pip install of the semantic kernel. And then once it is installed, I'm going to load this, and I'm going to load the OpenAI chat completion. Now, this is we've got a couple blogs on the Fabric blog based off of what Kim-Fee Low has done, and he's got a lot of great work out there on GitHub. This is one of those specific things. And remember when we deployed our model earlier, one of the things we're going to look for is we're going to look for the name, the API key, and the endpoint. We're going to plug those things in. I don't have access to a 4.0 model that Kim-Fee does, but I've got a 3.5 and a 3.5 turbo. Now, one of the things I want to make sure and show folks is that while we have both these models we can use, I'm due to time, I'm just going to skip straight to 16K because one of the things that you notice, and I've got a YouTube video that goes specifically into this, is we're going to ask bigger questions. Those bigger questions, those texts, that's tokens in the OpenAI world. And so we need 16,000K to accept larger questions, larger tokens. And so I'm going to invoke this model. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to look at our chat service. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to point to our base skills directory. Now, for the semantic kernel, where this is different from LangChain, is I can actually supply this a configuration JSON value, which tells me about the presets that I have with my model. And then I also have a prompt. And this prompt, this is essentially what Netflix was paying $900,000 a year for when they were hiring prompt engineering for movie data. And you can see the way we've got this set up. And what we're doing is we're adding a question here. Well, one of the things I'm going to do, I'm going to use a different set of questions when we go a little bit further, because specifically I found that this question needed a little bit of editing. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to change the way that we actually look at this by asking the question a little bit different. And so one of the things to keep in mind is when we're talking about prompt engineering, it is 100% about us asking the question correctly. So I'm going to point over to my lakehouse, my default files and skills, and I'm going to read this in. I'm going to show you the first output. We're going to take the data and we're reading basically the README files for the GitHub entries for the Fabric documentation. And what we're going to do is I'm going to say, hey, summarize this code and documentation for us. So, oh, I hopped over to the wrong notebook. I'm on, oh, yeah, sorry. I'm asking questions. Sorry, we're not summarizing documents. We're asking questions about this data set. So this is the data set I've got, and I pulled this directly from my data lake as well. And I want to visualize, I want to create a visualization with no code. So what I'm going to say is generate a bar chart to list the product type and display the number of product zones by the corresponding product type. Now this is going to work just fine because I've got my 16K and it needed the 16K to be able to ask these questions. But you can see all I did was ask an English question specifically right here. And I got this bar chart back. One of the things that we've been able to do is we've been able to do this also with financial data. And we've been able to take that financial data and you can actually do forecasts as well. So very important to realize this is a very, very powerful tool. As a matter of fact, we're going to showcase some of that at Live 360. So when we come in here, one of the next things that we can do is we're going to switch over to our Spark skill, and I'm going to read in our sales data. When I read in our sales data, what this will do is I'm going to now ask a question, but what I'm asking for is I'm asking it to run a search specifically on this and bring back specific data where I'm saying search on order date and find me a count for my sales order line number. Now, I didn't write any T-SQL for this. This is what I got. Now, the interesting thing is if I look at it, I did a little print right here. This is the code that was generated. What this did was this said, hey, we're going to create a temp table. Oh, let me add some inners right here. Let me run this SQL statement and let me do a results show. And if I run that statement, you can see I got this right here, but I didn't need to know Python to be able to generate all of this. I was able just to ask the question, search order date on this specific date and give me the counts of the sales order line number. That's very, very impressive stuff and how we can use OpenAI to be able to create some of these GPT applications. So can we create T-SQL? We absolutely can. As a matter of fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask specifically, I'm going to say, use my lakehouse, use sales, and give me a count on the total quality of items for sales table where the item column is road 150, red 44. When I do this, it comes out with this SQL statement for me. And if I paste that right there, I can see it's actually running against my lakehouse. It's running against my sales table because I provided it that information. I said, generate this. And what it's going to do is it's running this query. Now I could ask it to pull this back as a table. I can ask this to pull it back in multiple different ways, but I've just said, hey, give me the text so I can run a query. And as you can see, it gave me the results. So what I'm able to show specifically with this is that I can ask a question and I can get results from my notepad, from my Fabric notebook, which I think is just absolutely fascinating. So that way, and I'm just checking the time real quick. So that way we can intelligently build Copilot to be able to find this information. So I created a bar chart, I created T-SQL, I showed what we were doing behind the scenes. I know that was a really quick demo, but we're kind of running short on time. And Brad, I know we wanted to get to a pipeline demo that you were looking at.
Yeah, I think it's really cool. All this stuff is just making it's making all this technology so much more accessible to folks than what it used to be. Like just being able to go in and like I know nobody's if you're not going to go write T-SQL, you're probably not going to go write a bunch of Python code to have it generate a line of T-SQL. But there are going to be folks in the organization that can go write all that stuff and wrap this up in something really nice to be able to give out to a bunch of people to say, hey, just type in a prompt here and we'll spit out some T-SQL at the other end to get you started. Um, that kind of stuff is going to open up a lot of insights for organizations and departments and things that didn't have the ability to do that or didn't have the budget to go hire a consultant at hundreds of dollars an hour to write that T-SQL statement for them or spend time going and scraping from Stack Overflow to try to find the right statement syntax and everything to plug into your codes. I think there's a lot of really cool stuff coming on this front. Like I'm excited to see how all this stuff helps me dive into stuff like Python and other areas that I just don't have the time to go dive into as much as I did when I was a consultant, where that was just my job 24 hours a day to learn all this stuff. So I think it's going to open up a lot of really interesting things.
Well, and the nice thing is, I've literally used that last demo for us to be able to go to customers, and somebody says, "Tell me this about my data," and then I insert that question into there, and as long as we consume the data, because I was again just consuming data that we had files in our data lake, data that we already had within the data lake that we had set as tables. So any direction you want to point it, we can point it. We consume the data, and then we can just turn around and go, well, here's your answer, and it spit it out. So as long as you've got that, just a couple statements to be able to put in place, you can block that out. And it's going to get even easier on the roadmap, as we saw it when we start to get Copilot within this quarter, because you don't have to learn Python. It's going to write the Python for you. And of course, as our good friend Mr. Power says, Python all the things.
Everything.
Python everything. We'll Copilot Python everything.
Well, this last thing is right up Mr. Alex Powers' alley here with some stuff on pipelines. This is another one of those requests that we've gotten for a very long time. Of I want to make my development a little bit easier, and this is obviously not an actual workflow that we've got on the screen here, but it's representative. So I just put a bunch of wait activities out here to represent what we were going to do. So if we were to think about maybe a workflow where we're loading some data, I'm going to go look up and see which tables I need to load. Maybe I'm going to loop over some tables, and I'm going to move the data in with a copy activity probably. And then I want to go and log that, log the success into a tracking table of some sort. But if something goes wrong, maybe the lookup fails here, I want to log that failure into a table, and then maybe I want to send out a notification on Teams to somebody. Well,
because there's a lot of technologies that still have text for beepers or beeper number, and that's the thing, is that's not modern. I was going to say, once upon a time, way back when Star Wars
Stone Age.
So
Wars is new. Wow.
Yeah, but most of us have more modern cell phones. We have Teams on our cell phones. We have the ability to push alerts. And so I don't want something sending me a text message. I'd rather, if I'm going to get an alert, get it on some way that I'm able to monitor this. So you're going to send this to Teams.
Yeah, exactly. And there's the ability to push to an HTTP endpoint if you want to, or send an email with Outlook, the Outlook activities and stuff. So all kinds of things that you can do in here. But the problem is, historically, with the Data Factory workloads, whether that's here inside Fabric, inside Data Factory itself, or inside of Synapse pipeline, is what happens if I build this, but I just want to test one piece of it. If I just want to test this lookup, how do I do it? Well, then I've got to go in here, I've got to start deleting stuff. I've got to copy the pipeline and then delete everything so that I'm only running this one particular piece. Or maybe I want to put everything on here, but I don't want to actually send Brad a notification every time I'm doing testing and my pipeline fails here. So we've added this new ability here to deactivate individual activities. So if I want to, I can say, I'm going to do a bunch of testing here, but I'm actually going to deactivate this Teams notification here. So it's going to do everything except for when there's a failure, don't send you a notification on Teams. And if it's going to Alex, he loves email. So I'm going to send him an email every single time, and I'm never going to send him a Teams message because he just loves working out of his inbox. So he says, send me emails, don't send me to Teams is what I read there anyway. So I'm going to be able to do this, run this activity and not notify him. The cool thing about this the ability to deactivate, and if you go back to like the SSIS days, like that's where I started my career building all this stuff on-prem and SSIS. It was easy because you could right click on something and disable a particular task and it wouldn't run it. But like, what happens if I want to run just test a portion of this. Well, I can simulate different activities in here as well. So if I come over here and I deactivate this, I can say that I want to mark this activity as succeeded. And when I run this, it's going to treat my little precedence constraints here as a success, and it's going to go down this path. So if I wanted to make sure that it ran the failure path, though, I can say, you know what, treat this activity, even though it's deactivated, as though it failed. And so now, like if I were to run this here, we'll just save that real quick and run it. It's actually going to run. You'll see in the activity pane down here at the bottom that it shows the lookup tables was inactive, which is correct, but it went down the failure path. So it went to my log failure, and then it didn't do anything because my notification was disabled as well. So we can not only disable, but we can simulate the activity that we want to perform to be able to test a particular path inside of our pipeline here. So super duper useful to be able to do testing, to just be able to do development and only, just work on one particular slice. The only thing I'll call out that I want to make sure people are aware of is that this does mean that nothing is passed between these different activities. So if I come over here and I look at the output from like my lookup tables, if this were an actual lookup activity, there wouldn't be an output that I could then go pass into a downstream activity, maybe into a loop that I'm going to run or something like that. So just be aware there are ramifications to disabling these because the JSON payload doesn't get generated the same way it would if I had actually run a lookup activity or something like that inside my pipeline. Not a big deal, just something to be aware of though. But that was all I wanted to highlight because this is a big request that's come for a long time. And I think it's, as an SSIS person, this is incredibly exciting to me, even though it seems like a very small feature.
Well, and it's incredibly exciting, right? Because people have forever wanted the capability to test the failure path, to be able to set inactive, to be able to. I can't tell you how many times I've got questions from customers about pipelines and going, I really want to just test this portion of it, but I don't want to execute all of this. How do I do that? This lets them customize it. And I love your reminder because you're absolutely right. You got to look at those dependent tasks that are really, really key. If I'm going to do a for each and I have a lookup operation, I need to be able to pull the data from that lookup to be able to loop through the for each if I'm going to look at it. So we've got to look at those dependent tasks, make sure that we only disable those things that we need to, but we may have some superfluous, forgive me. That was my tangential. Anyway, we may have some superfluous events that we don't need to be able to execute. And the notify is a perfect one, right? I want to test the failure condition, but I don't want to send a notification to this team, especially if we're doing some type of testing and it's where the teams get alerts that need to be able to be advised if something fails so we can figure out how to rerun it or begin to look at this and troubleshoot and execute. I also love the Teams event. I mean, how easy is that thing to just be able to drag and drop and install? We have a video where I walked through that, where I said, hey, you sign into Teams, you select your channel. And I showed how we could use a dynamic event to be able to make that message that we need to. Oh, let me go back to your screen. Sorry, I don't want to miss that. Outlook 365 as well. And so
if you are one of those orgs that wants to send emails for some unknown reason, we've got that ability here as well.
Yeah, but not for Alex. No. We're going to Teams.
It's the email Alex activity.
I think you're working on getting yourself not invited to Wednesday wrestling and pizza night.
Well, I'm going to get my own pizza.
You'll get your own pizza. Excellent. Okay, so we've got just 1 minute left. So I want to thank everybody. We didn't make it to every single one of the demos, but for the demos that we did not make it to, we do have videos out there. So please go take a look at those videos. If you have any questions from this broadcast or from any other video that we have, drop it in the comments. We listen to you. You help drive the content that we produce. We really appreciate all of you for sticking with us, especially with the technical difficulties where we had to switch links. And we want to thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate you spending that time with us. We hope that you are enjoying Microsoft Fabric and that you have a lot of fun out there. Brad, anything you want to say before we sign off?
No, just keep an eye out for next month. It's going to be a big one.
All right. I appreciate you. Go check out that October roadmap, the October release announcements on the Fabric blog. Speak here in a minute. And then also make
We lost you, Brad.
free. That's what we're in. All right. Appreciate you. Take care, everybody.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Good day. Wake up. Today's gonna be a good day. Wake up. Today's gonna be a good day. Wake up. Today's gonna be a good day. Wake up.